Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another daily devotion. I'm Pastor Roy here at Woodlawn Christian Church, and we do these devotions Monday through Friday. So if you've stumbled upon them, we'd love to have you back. So please like and subscribe. This devotion is for June 21st of 2022, and we are in the 19th, that we've just gotten to the 19th chapter of Matthew's Gospel. We're going to look at verses 1 to 12 today. And this that we're dealing with today is the second place where Matthew talks about divorce. He talked about it the first time back in chapter 5, and we dealt with that back on Ash Wednesday. So it's been a while, back on March 2nd of 2022. That is when we talked about Matthew chapter 5, verses 31 to 37. So if you want to go back and listen to that video, please feel free. Some of the same things will be talked about here, much of it probably very similar. I think I've got a couple of other things, additional things we'll talk about today as well. But it is, both times, it's very similar, what he's saying, extremely similar. And they follow up, both of them, ironically, after talking about forgiveness. So then we come to these prohibitions on divorce. So let that be as it may. Now, let's take a look at verses 1, let's look at verses 1 through 12 in chapter 19 in Matthew's Gospel. When Jesus had finished saying these things, he left Galilee and went to the region of Judea beyond the Jordan. Large crowds followed him, and he cured them there. Some Pharisees came to him, and to test him, they asked, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any cause?" He answered, "Have you not read that the one who made them at the beginning made them male and female, and said, 'For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother, and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate.' They said to him, 'Why then did Moses command us to give a certificate of dismissal and to divorce her?' He said to them, 'It was because you are so hard-hearted that Moses allowed you to divorce your wives. But from the beginning it was not so. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, and marries another, commits adultery, and he who marries a divorced woman commits adultery.' The disciples said to him, 'If such is the case of a man with his wife, it is better not to marry.' But he said to them, 'Not everyone can accept this teaching, but only those to whom it is given. For there are eunuchs who have been so from birth, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by others, and there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Let anyone accept this who can.'" Okay. Now, we may want to go look at in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Paul talks a little about this, about you shouldn't marry kind of thing. I think that's what he's talking about. Let anyone, if you can, make yourself a eunuch. It's a metaphoric eunuch. It's not a literal there. If you can deal with not being married, then don't. It's probably along the line of what Paul is saying, though definitely in Jewish culture, marriage and producing children is a primary goal in life. You wanted someone to be your lineage. This whole thing of genealogy was very important. That's why at the beginning of Matthew, the beginning of Luke, you have Jesus's genealogy is important. Okay, so where you come from, who you are. That's largely about who your ancestors were. So it's important. So here in verses 10 to 12. It's, first of all, much of this is to be taken metaphorically, not literally. But in that culture, there was definitely conversation about eunuchs and those that had damaged genitalia, not just castration, but damage to the penis. I hope I don't get taken down from YouTube for saying that, and I apologize to anyone that is offended by that. But let's not be offended by everything, folks. But the point is that if you're not able to have children, you're excused from the requirement to be married, because that's the whole idea of being married, was to have children. And so he's saying it would be better for us if we didn't need to marry. If we can't be married and just have a problem and divorce her, and then that becomes a sin. So there's much wrapped up in verses 10 to 12 there, I think 10, 11, and 12 about all of that. But it's also metaphoric that you're not literally making yourself a eunuch, but you're being, for the sake of not being married for excusing yourself from basically, it's not necessarily a law, but it's very much thought as was what you were to do was to have children. That was what was expected. Okay, but there is a great deal of stuff in the Talmud to dealing with that kind of injury, whether you're injured because of a birth defect or injured because of an infection. From circumcision, you could have easily had an infection and it caused to be maimed, or where you're from an injury or from war or what have you. Lots of different things that could go on there. But we've belabored that enough. Let's go back to the first 9 verses, shall we? And actually, we're going to pick up here what Jesus has moved. We won't deal with that. But the Pharisees have come to test him. They think they're going to get him. The whole thing with divorce definitely was a topic of the time, because you've got Hillel and Shammai. Hillel would be the more liberal rabbi, and Shammai was the more conservative rabbi. They had different opinions about divorce. Hillel thought that you could divorce your wife for literally any kind of a thing. My mentor Jesse used to always joke that if you burned the dinner, you could be divorced. You could divorce your wife if she burned the dinner, or she just whatever. It could be a very frivolous reason that Hillel was for. Not a good thing. A lot of times we will look at what Hillel was believing about your neighbor and things like that, and think, well, okay, well, he's close to where he should be. But there were definitely places he was dead wrong, in my opinion, and the divorce was. Shammai, on the other hand, held that you didn't divorce your wife for anything except sexual immorality. Exactly what Matthew has here in this. Now, ironically, that's not in Mark or Luke. We did this also in Luke's gospel when we did the commentary or the discussion of it. It's in the playlist. I forget where that's at in Luke off the top of my head, but we did talk about that. It's very short in Luke. It's more in Mark. It's more in Matthew. Matthew talks again about twice, and if we look at Mark as being the oldest and the more original language, we don't have that exclusion there. And ironically, in some of the manuscripts of Matthew, you also don't have this verse saying that you can divorce your wife for sexual immorality. So there are those that believe that it wasn't there to begin with. I think Matthew probably put it there, but I think he put it there because he's dealing with a Jewish crowd. But the point that Jesus has here is that you're no longer two, you are one, joined in the eyes of God. You have made this, and I've talked about this back when we talked about it in March. You have made a covenant. When you go before God to have a wedding ceremony in the church, whether it be a Jewish church or whether it be a Christian church, when you go into a religious ceremony, you could do it outside, folks. It doesn't have to be inside the building. In a religious ceremony, you are making a commitment to God. It's a covenant with God, not just making a covenant or an agreement with your to-be spouse and then becoming your spouse and having this marriage. You've made an agreement with God. It's a covenant agreement, a 3-way covenant between you, your spouse, and God. And so these are not covenant. This is not a covenant you want to violate just willy-nilly. I'm making up words here. Willy-nilly, because you don't do that. You don't violate an agreement, a covenant agreement with God. That's a bad idea. Don't do it. And again, this is a tough subject for me because I've been divorced. I was married before I got married to Gail, and so I've committed this sin. It is one that I don't like having to deal with, but I do. But the point is that you confess the sin. You recognize that you have sinned, and that it is in fact, divorce is in fact a sin in Jesus' eyes. All right. Here in Matthew, though, you do have this exclusion for sexual immorality. Now, the Greek word there is pariah, and it's where we get the pornography, which is the word we get pornography from. It means fornication or whoredom. It means a selling off of a surrendering of your sexual purity. That can mean a multitude of things beyond just heterosexual intercourse. But I think here, given what the context is, it's talking about extramarital intercourse. But it's only on the behalf of the woman. There's no provision here in Matthew's gospel, nor in Shammai's teachings, which would be in the Talmud, or the Mishnah, probably, not necessarily, but at any rate, we're not going to belabor that because we're not Jewish, and I forget my divisions in the Talmud and the Mishnah. But at any rate, Shammai taught that this was just the woman. It's not about, the men's sexual infidelity is not an issue for divorce. That's not allowed. But there you could divorce. Oftentimes, and so it's the reason why that would be, I'll backtrack a little bit. Why would that be? Well, because if a man's is sleeping around, well, that his wife, the child his wife has, unless she's sleeping around, is still his. So it's all about hereditary or heritage and passing down your name. If your wife is sleeping around, you may be giving your heritage to someone that has stepped in and taken it away. You may be giving your inheritance as not only your name but all your possessions to someone else's offspring, and so that's frowned upon in a very paternal society, where the patriarchal society. That's the word I want. Forgive me today, can't talk. They'll be looked down upon in a patriarchal society. They want it's about my seed, so to say. Not so to say, it is. And so that's why you have this prohibition on the woman and not on the man. I think that Luke and Mark's are probably more likely what Jesus said, and he just flat out a prohibition. You just don't do it. It's not to be done. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't believe in this day and age that people that are suffering from physical and emotional abuse, such as psychological abuse, that's not grounds for divorce. We do have to be a little careful there, because it would be easy enough to say that I've been abused mentally by this person. Just almost anything can be construed as mental abuse. Now, I'm not going to defend people that are abusing their spouse mentally. By no means am I doing that. I'm just saying that we have to be a little careful there. Divorce is far too easy. It's a big problem in our culture that plays a little bit into the sermon from yesterday, from Father's Day, about the importance of the family unit, the nuclear family, the importance of the family raising the children. And that's a big part of why we have problems in society, is fatherless, single-parent families. So if you want to see that, go look for the sermon from Father's Day. It might be a day or two before I get it up, though, because I'm behind on sermons. The other point I want to point out in here, oftentimes those among us, the more liberal folks, and my mentor Jesse would have definitely been one of the advocates of this idea, was the supervision on divorce, and because Jesse was divorced too, but he's trying to explain away his guilt. I don't do that. Most do. At least I don't on this subject. We all try to explain away our guilt somewhere. We have to understand that, and we shouldn't. Don't do that. But oftentimes they say, "Oh, because the woman would have no choice but to go into, prostitution. She would have to go back and sell herself, this porneia. She'd have to commit that, and she'd have to be doing that commercially, not just for surrendering it. Just she's doing it for cash, money on the barrelhead, as they say." But there's a problem with that argument, and that's in verse 9 at the end. And it says, "And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality," okay, "and marries another commits adultery." If you divorce your wife for any other reason except for sexual immorality on her part, you commit adultery. "And he who marries a divorced woman commits adultery." If it's all about protecting the woman economically so that she doesn't have to go into the oldest profession, it's to provide for her, because she'd have no other choice, very little other choice for an economic way to make money in that economy. But if it was only about protecting her, then why would you condemn the person that marries her? That makes no sense. In fact, it isn't. That's why that argument is absolutely incorrect. It's fatally flawed. It is not correct at all. It's a sin, folks, and quit trying to explain it away. And he who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. It's there. It's right there. That is the reason. It is a sin, folks. Divorce is a sin. We need to admit that. We need to quit having 50% of our marriages, roughly thereabout, as they say, or they claim anyway, end in divorce. That flies right down the line, according to the statistics, whether it be a secular or a religious couple. That doesn't seem to make any difference. I don't think there's really much difference among the clergy either. I think it would be a problem to be in the clergy and get divorced. That happens, and stay in the clergy, but it does happen. I have a cousin that she got divorced. And she's still a minister. So it does happen. I would find that very difficult, given my beliefs on marriage and all of that. I can proceed because it happened before I was even really a Christian. But I do still do view it as a sin. I'm not going to minimize that at all. So it's not about protecting the woman. It's about protecting the covenant, the agreement with God. It's all about adhering, maintaining, honoring that commitment. And that is what it's about. It's a tough bit of scripture. But hey, if you don't find any scripture to be tough, you are not paying attention and you're not really listening. You're not listening at all, because there's always going to be something somewhere. A lot of it's going to be there that's corrective. This is definitely a warning. This is definitely something we need to be bearing in mind. Definitely something we need to teach our young people that are getting ready to be married, and it's something that I very much talk to folks about when I'm counseling them for getting married, premarital counseling, because it was never driven home to me. Either time I got married, was there any premarital counseling? None. Nada. Didn't happen. Neither of those. And one of those was that Gail and I got married. I really respect that minister. He was a wonderful minister. But I see that as a failing in his ministry, that he didn't do premarital counseling. So, really should be done. So, with that, I'm going to let you go for today. I think I've gotten on my high horse enough on my ranting. I apologize if I've offended you, but sometimes Scripture will offend you, folks, and sometimes life is going to offend us. But we have to look at it and say, am I offended because I'm right, or am I offended because I know I'm guilty and I don't want to admit it? Most of the time, I think it's the latter. All right. With that, please, please, please have a blessed day, and please, please, please be a blessing to someone today. And I apologize. This one's a little bit long. It's about twice as long as I like to have them. All right. God bless. Take care.